Good afternoon, everyone. I have some binoculars because I'm sort of looking. I had to bring this. If you haven't seen the TikTok, it was important, to share some lightness around such a heavy topic. But welcome so much. Thank you for joining the Economic Progress Institute for the first half. And then the Revenue for Rhode Islanders are going to be launching our revenue campaign. This first half, I think, is really important. I know when we started hearing about the migration myth, I always like to, and I didn't even introduce myself. I'm Wayona Nelson Davies, the Executive Director of the Economic Progress Institute. Thank you. I have some friends in the room. When we started hearing about the migration myth, my first question to Alan was, is it true? Because one of the things we do at the Economic Progress Institute, besides advocating, is to find out whether what we're talking about is based in fact and data. And so I wanted to know for myself if we were going to come to the State House and say it's important to raise revenue to invest in our children, in education, in public education, that millionaires or 1% will not leave the state. And so I wanted to know if that was true, because if it wasn't, then we could come and make the argument that all of us benefit when we have more money invested into our communities. And that is what this is about. It's really to share light on what has been happening in Massachusetts, what has been happening in New England and across the country when taxes are raised to invest back in our community. So Alan will be, and we invited a special friend of ours from Massachusetts to give us the tea. What has happened in Massachusetts? One, have millionaires left your state since 2022? Two, have you been able to invest in anything at all? And three, were you able to raise revenue? Those are questions we have in Rhode Island, and we've invited our friend, which I will introduce later, Andrew Fernandino, who is from Massachusetts and worked on that campaign, to talk to us a little bit about what has happened in Massachusetts. But now I'll turn it over to Alan to share light on what he has found out, whether there's truth to the millionaire myth. And I have my binoculars for us to go look in to see if anyone's going to leave after Alan's presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Wayona. My name is Alan Krinsky. Again, I'm the Director of Research and Fiscal Policy at the Economic Progress Institute. And I'm here today to present on our policy brief, Moving Beyond the Mass Exodus Tax Flight Myth. And the slides should be up soon. So this is one in a series of policy briefs that Economic Progress is doing. We did 3 last year. We're doing 3 during this legislative session. This is the 4th in that series. And so first, I want to ask, why is this policy brief needed? And the reason is that in efforts to raise the top levels of income tax, this is the arguments used against it most frequently, to say people who have high income and wealth are going to flee the state over it. And there's going to be a mass exodus of people doing that. And this is a claim that we investigated, others investigated, there have been decades of data, and this is not the case, it's not supported by the evidence. And this policy brief, in 5 parts, puts this myth to rest. And these are some of the key findings from the report, or from the brief, that not only are millionaires and millionaires not moving towards lower and no tax states in great numbers, they're not there to begin with. They're not disproportionately living in those states. You thought they would have sorted themselves by now already. And despite claims that people have been fleeing Rhode Island, we look at the data that higher income people are actually moving into Rhode Island, and we'll share that. Also, that comparing Rhode Island against the other New England states, the patterns have been very similar among all the states, despite big differences in the tax systems of those states. And then also the Fair Share Amendment in Massachusetts, that we'll hear more about after, has produced higher revenue than even had been anticipated at the beginning, and has helped fund public transit and education and other programs. So I want to go through a little bit of each of the 5 sections, some of the highlights from the policy brief. And so first, this is looking in general, and the Cornell scholar Cristobal Young and his colleagues got access to over a decade's worth of IRS data. They got over 40 million tax records for all millionaire filers in those 12 or so years through 2011, and then a sample about 24 million other returns. They compared those, and this chart that they produced shows that shows the migration rate, looking from one year to the next, how many people left in any one year. And you'll see from here that actually the highest migration rates are from the lowest income Americans, going from one state to another, and that the rates for people in the higher income groups is not particularly higher than most people. So that's one part. And then when people move, they move for various reasons. Even in these numbers that we see, they're in sort of that 2 to 4% range in any one year. So no evidence of a mass migration of a much larger number, like a double-digit number anywhere. And then when people move, they move for different reasons. And actually, when they ask people reasons to move, people rarely cite taxes. They talk about jobs, family, climate, moving to warmer climates, a movement towards the South. And then even within that movement, it's not all from high or higher tax states to lower tax or no tax states. There's a lot of movement the other way. And what this table shows is that for Rhode Islanders, say, moving to Florida, for every 100 who moved to Florida, about 59 move back. For every 100 who move from Rhode Island to New Hampshire, about 79 move in the other direction. So, starting this group, which is already relatively small, people who move, there's movement in the other direction, from low or no tax states to higher tax states. And there's people moving for various different reasons. So it's not to say that high income taxpayers never move from a higher to a lower tax or no tax state, but what Young and his colleagues show is that this is statistically at the margins. It doesn't have major significance. So again, it's not that it never happens, but it doesn't happen, and certainly not the levels when people talk about a mass exodus. It's not happening on those kinds of levels. And they've looked at data to show that's the case. So they looked at the case of New Jersey with their 2004 millionaires tax, and they looked at people moved in, people moved out, and the reasons, and showed that there was a net loss of 1 in 2,000 millionaires. Now for Rhode Island, where we have about 3,000 millionaires in the entire state, we're talking about a net loss of maybe 1 to 2 tax filers and their families, which is 1/10 of 1% of such filers. There's just no historical evidence for a mass kind of exodus over modest changes in tax policy of the top rates. And then they go on to explain this, Young and his colleagues, with what they call the embedded elites hypothesis. In other words, there's sort of this, I think, idea that someone who has a lot of money, they can do whatever they want, they're not attached to anything, and they can leave. But, that may be the case for some movie stars or something who don't have to be where they work. But lots of people, among those who are fortunate enough to be millionaires, the top 1%, they're actually more connected on average in their communities, their business networks, their social networks, their family networks. That actually makes it harder for them, perhaps, to just pick up and leave. And so they explain why that makes sense, that we're not seeing this large movement of the highest income people. Okay, now I want to turn to the Rhode Island data. And in this chart, what we have is this is IRS data for about 10 years, 10 or 11 years. And it splits it up here. We split the data up. The blue column on the right are Rhode Islanders with taxable income of $200,000 and above. And then the gray bar to the left is everyone else. And so if you thought that higher income Rhode Islanders were leaving a lot, you'd expect that blue bar to be a lot taller. This is out-migration rates, people leaving the state. And what you see here is that, if anything, the higher income group is a little bit less likely in most years to leave the state. Next, we have net migration. I think this is in ways a more important measure, because it takes not only who's leaving, but who's coming into the state and looks at the difference. And if you look here, same thing here. The blue columns on the right are the 200,000 plus income group, and the gray is everyone else in Rhode Island for these 11 or 12 years. And here we see the last 6 years for which we have data through 2022, The higher income group, has been moving into the state with a positive net migration into the state, and certainly at a higher rate in most years than people in filers of other income levels. Okay, I want to turn quickly to Massachusetts here, and there, in the first couple of years since Massachusetts voters passed the Fair Share Amendment, they've had collections above initial estimates and above $2 billion a year. Governor Healy recently unveiled her proposed budget. It includes hundreds of millions of dollars for things like public transit, education, and things like funding school meals for children. And there's been no evidence that we've seen of tax flight, massive tax flight from Massachusetts or anywhere else. And the revenue impact is significant. In addition to the Massachusetts case, we have evidence from New Jersey, where I mentioned earlier that case in 2004. Well, it's true some people may have left, and there was, from the folks who left, there'd be estimated 16.4 million lost in revenue. But in only 1 year, in 2006, there was over $1 billion in new revenue. So the amount of revenue dwarfed. California had a similar kind of thing, a loss in 2012 or in the years after that of about $200 million in revenue from people leaving, which sounds like a lot for Rhode Island. But in the first year of California's tax on the highest income earners, they generated $5.8 billion in revenue. So it's just the examples we have from Massachusetts, New Jersey, California show the revenue advantages are pretty stunning. Now, to compare Rhode Island and the other New England states, you might think that because of the different tax systems, New Hampshire without a personal income tax, Massachusetts with the years examined here with a single flat tax, that we see big differences in migration rates, but we don't. You can see here that the patterns of out-migration are very similar over a decade here. And actually, New Hampshire had the highest out-migration rate, and Maine, which had the second highest top tax rate, had the lowest out-migration rate in most years. And Rhode Island somewhere in the middle there. And then again, going to net migration, which I think is even better measure, it's a pretty narrow band of the net migration, of out-migration minus the in-migration. And again, you would expect if the different tax systems and different top rates were making a big difference, you'd see much bigger split among these numbers, but we don't. Okay, the last section of the brief deals with the question of not so much migration, but where do millionaires and billionaires actually live? Because you might have thought they would have sorted themselves, and millionaires would have already gone to the no and lowest tax states, and that every time someone then becomes a millionaire, they again move to one of those. But these are the same data that Young and his colleagues I shared at the beginning, and they looked at millionaires like, where do they live? And so what this chart shows is on the sort of the left side, the y-axis showing how many millionaires per 1,000 residents in a state, and then the top tax rate along the bottom. So that group on the left are the no tax, the 7 no tax states. And so you would think that those 7 no tax states would have a much higher count of millionaires per 1,000 residents, but they don't. This line in this chart is pretty flat, showing that the distribution of millionaires is pretty similar in states across the country, regardless of their tax systems. We would not have expected that if it was true that millionaires were going to, and higher income filers were going to no and lower tax states. And then there's also the billionaires there's like the Forbes list of billionaires that Young looked at. And again, you'd expect the same thing. You'd expect the billionaires to be concentrating in those lower and no tax states. And again, we see an almost flat line here where we would have expected a higher concentration of billionaires in those lower and no tax states. We don't see that. And this is, again, looking at lots of data, the slide before, over a decade's worth of data. And so then why? And one of the answers is that millionaires and billionaires, they live where they want to. They can afford to do so. Given their high levels of income, often their wealth, that the differences in top marginal rates of states' income taxes is not going to have a significant impact on their standard of living. they can imagine they live where they want to. I just want to turn before concluding. Some folks may have seen the Greater Providence Chamber of Commerce sent out an email on Friday calling for opposition to the proposals to have a new surtax on the top 1% in Rhode Island. And I may have more to say on this email at some future point, but I just want to point out a few things. One, they rely on United Van Line's data, which isn't exactly the data source I would necessarily use to make policy decisions about. It's a limited data set based on only their own customers. What's sort of more interesting here is that they both, on the bottom of this, the bottom thing circled here, talks about how people are moving into Rhode Island, yet in the big thing in the middle, it says about the exodus of high-income people who have left the state. So I'm not sure if they're saying people are moving into Rhode Island, they're leaving Rhode Island. They seem to be saying both. There's a mention here of a Boston Celtics player who left for the Dallas team over claiming in part over taxes. And this is something we deal, there are 5 appendices dealing with some of the more technical issues in the policy brief. And one of them is about this question. And for most people of high income, when they leave a state, they don't actually take their jobs and their income with them. Because, the Celtics, they hired another player who's probably also getting $1 million, right? So it's not like that just disappeared from Massachusetts. And so it's important to note, and they say here that the millionaire's tax has been good for Massachusetts. Is simply not true, this claim. But I think we may hear a little bit more. I think the children who are getting the free breakfast and lunches at school, or the public transit riders in Massachusetts, might disagree about the Mass Fair Share Amendment not being a good thing for Massachusetts. So I just want to conclude then that you may hear anecdotes, people like bring anecdotes of particular wealthy people who have left the state, or accountants saying that their clients are talking about possibly leaving a state. But the decades of data just show that this doesn't happen on a mass level. And not that it doesn't ever happen. There may be some people who are thinking about moving for other reasons, and maybe this plays a role. But the idea that there are lots of high-income people who are happy living in Rhode Island or Massachusetts or wherever, happy with everything about their lives, but they're going to pick up and uproot themselves and their families and possibly their businesses over a change in the top marginal rate. This is not a mass phenomenon that's happening anywhere. Decades of evidence show that's the case. So if there are, for example, legislators in this room or building who are thinking about the policy proposals, and they're sort of on the fence or may be inclined to support this kind of policy proposal because of what good the revenue could bring, and they're sort of worried that if they support it, is it going to cause a mass exodus of high-income people? I'm here to say the data shows no. That should not worry you. If that's the obstacle to supporting legislation like this, that is not a good reason established in the data. And that's it. I encourage people to look at the policy brief, and thank you. And now I'll turn it over to Andrew Farnetana, who's the communications director for the Raise Up Massachusetts Coalition.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for having me here today. I'm Andrew Farnetano. I was proud to serve as communications director for the Raise Up Massachusetts campaign that passed the Fair Share Amendment in Massachusetts in 2022. And I work with a coalition of community, faith, and labor groups in Massachusetts that worked for 8 years to bring the Fair Share Amendment to our state. I'm here to report that the Massachusetts Fair Share Amendment is a resounding, unqualified success. Our Fair Share Amendment, very similar to the policy that's being considered here, is a tax on only the top 1% of the state's residents. It created a 4% tax on the portion of a person's income that's above $1 million. So anything less than $1 million was untouched. Anything above $1 million received an additional 4% tax. It was passed by voters in November 2022 on the ballot. It's now a permanent part of our state's constitution. For legal reasons, it had to be done through the Constitution rather than as traditional legislation. And during the campaign to pass Fair Share, we heard many of the same concerns about millionaire flight, about whether the money that was raised would really materialize, about whether programs that we talked about, like education and transportation, would really receive the investments that were being promised. We predicted that the Fair Share Amendment would generate $2 billion a year, and opponents said we were crazy. They said the money will not show up because multimillionaires will flee the state en masse rather than pay the new tax. And they were flat out wrong. The Fair Share Amendment generated $2.4 billion in its first full fiscal year of tax collections. And our state Department of Revenue is now projecting that in each of the first 3 years of the amendment's existence, it will generate at least that much. Revenue from the millionaire's tax has consistently exceeded the state's own expectations, generating surpluses that legislators have available to spend on transportation and education, and it's already making an enormous difference for the people of Massachusetts. Fair Share is delivering real savings for our state's families and making a real difference for affordability for working and middle-class people across the state. It's funding universal school meals for every student, breakfast and lunch in every school in the state. It's funding free bus service with expanded routes, weekend service. It's funding expanded childcare families for more children in our state. There's now 7,000 more seats at childcare providers across the state. It's also in higher education funding free community college and expanded scholarship options for middle-class students. That have generated substantial enrollment growth at our state's colleges and universities after a decade where enrollment was declining. It's improving our public services and strengthening our infrastructure. It's funding school building repairs and state aid to local schools, supporting road and bridge repairs in every single city and town in the state, and it's enabling a significant investment in the MBTA to finally bring it into a state of good repair, upgrading commuter rail tracks, upgrading subway trains. And there's been no evidence of any substantial migration from multimillionaires. As the revenue data shows, they are clearly staying and paying the tax year after year. So it's true that Massachusetts has experienced outmigration in recent years, but it's not about millionaires fleeing a new tax. It's about young workers who are running away from the high cost of living that Massachusetts is struggling with. Opponents, in Massachusetts also cited data from U-Haul about people, picking up and moving out of state. I hate to break it to them, but multimillionaires are not renting U-Haul trucks when they move. I'm a millennial. I live in Boston. It's one of the most expensive cities in the state. Many of my peers have moved out of Massachusetts, some of them to Rhode Island, to pursue a lower cost of living, cheaper housing, lower childcare costs. That is the migration problem that Massachusetts is facing, and the Fair Share Amendment is helping us solve it by investing in affordable public college, affordable childcare, reducing fares on public transportation, and investing in our transportation infrastructure so we can build more housing and connect people to jobs. We are tackling and making a real dent in the key drivers of the actual migration problem we face. And the Fair Share Amendment is becoming more popular than ever as voters see the impact that these investments are having. Just last month, UMass Amherst conducted a statewide poll where they found that 66% of Massachusetts residents say the Fair Share Amendment has been a good thing for the state, including even a majority of Republicans in Massachusetts. There are some. And a majority across party lines agree that this has been a positive change for the state. And it's only getting started. Right now, our state legislators are in the middle of budget preparations, preparing to allocate an additional $3.25 billion in new fair share funding. They're talking about transformative investments at the T, major investments in public college infrastructure, more than doubling the impact that the amendment has had in just 1 year. So thanks to Fair Share, Massachusetts has a fairer tax system that's enabling new investments to support working and middle-class families. And I know I speak for all of us in the coalition in Massachusetts when we hope that our neighbors in Rhode Island will join us in building an economy that works for all of us, not just those at the top. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrew, for coming on the T and commuter rail to Rhode Island to be with us. And thank you, Alan, so much for all your work you've put into it. And I want to say this, the reason we wanted to address this myth, we're living during times where there's a lot of fear. And sometimes we spread fear by the things we say. And this myth has been held over our heads in Rhode Island for quite a while. I don't think it's fair to use it to threaten our legislators not to do what is needed at this time. What Andrew shared, I want for Rhode Island. I want us to be competitive. I think we all share the same value. We all want a Rhode Island that works for all of us. We don't disagree on that. We all have that value. It is important for us to understand what makes us competitive. We must think about the 99% of tax filers who need a fair tax structure to make us competitive. The message we need to give to our wealthy neighbors is not that you will leave, so fight taxes. Is maybe there will be an investment that make our schools better for all our children. Maybe we'll have a public transportation system that make our workers be able to get to work and that benefit our business. I think it is time in Rhode Island for us to come together and really understand the truth behind what does this mean? How much taxes are we really asking for from the top 1%? And we have a flyer to show those numbers. We're not asking for hundreds and thousands of dollars. There's a federal fight right now that will be shifting costs to Rhode Island. We have an over $220 million deficit. It is time to do something. And so I hope today we can stop spreading a myth, look at the numbers, come together as one Rhode Island and think about how this will benefit us. So we have a school system that works, we have people going to college, we have transportation and childcare in this state. That is what we're asking. That is why we're trying to share information. Let's do the right thing. Let our wealthy neighbors join us, and that nobody likes taxes, and we can all admit that. But we all want a state where we can enjoy and live and thrive. And if we can agree upon that, I hope we can find common ground by doing what must be done to protect Rhode Island during a time where we need all of the protection and all of the investment we need. So thank you for being here to hear us, to listen to the data, to listen to the facts on this first start. And then I'm going to turn it over now to the advocate. I'm not even advocating yet. I'm just sharing facts. But now I'm going to turn it over to the Revenue for Rhode Island Coalition, Rhode Islanders Coalition, that have been fighting for this. And it's a real fight, and they're going to share with you even more why we need this in Rhode Island. I will turn it over to Nina Harrison, the Policy Director at EPI and one of the steering committee members for the Revenue for Rhode Islanders Coalition.
Thank you, Aona, and thank you, Alan, and thank you for coming from Massachusetts to tout your success and entice us to follow your lead. Thank you all for being here today. I'm happy to see this room so full. You've heard from Alan about why this should not be a cause for concern about wealthy people fleeing this state, and he provided all the receipts about that. So I want to talk to you about the need for this legislation a little bit and about why maybe we should be more concerned about the average Rhode Islander fleeing the state because they can't afford to meet their basic needs here, and why we should be prioritizing keeping the average Rhode Islander here because they are the essential workers that we all know our state cannot function without. So you've heard from Alan that this is a safe bet. You've heard from our friend from Massachusetts that these are tried and true results. And I'm here to remind you that in Rhode Island, we have a dire need for this bill because 68% of single Rhode Islanders cannot afford to meet their basic needs without assistance. And that's according to EPI's 2024 Rhode Island Standard of Need report. 78% of single parents with 2 children cannot afford to meet their basic needs without assistance. And as many of you know, right now, federally, the very assistance that Rhode Islanders rely on to be able to meet their basic needs, Medicaid, SNAP, child care assistance, is being threatened with funding cuts of over $800 billion for Medicaid, and similarly large cuts for SNAP and other programs that Rhode Islanders need to function. And so this isn't business as usual this year. We're facing unique threats, and Rhode Island has an acute need that this bill could really, really help resolve. And that's also one of the reasons that this bill polls so well among constituents in Rhode Island, because the community is feeling that struggle. They are struggling and they're wanting a solution, and they know that this solution can make a meaningful difference in their lives. And the truth is, there may be some opposition from the business community, but that is not universal. We do also have support from the business community. We have the support of the Rhode Island Black Business Association and the Rhode Island Business Development Institute. And the reality is, businesses cannot thrive in a state that doesn't have stable infrastructure, a stable workforce, which requires solid public education and adult education programs, and requires people to be able to get to those jobs via roads and bridges that work and public transportation that's reliable and comprehensive. And all of which Rhode Island will struggle to do with a nearly $300 million budget deficit and the impending threat of substantial federal cuts to all of the programs I just mentioned. And so the rest of the people you'll be hearing from today will talk to you about what this policy and what this bill could do for them specifically, and also for Rhode Island more largely. And so first, I'd like to invite up here Reverend Dwayne Clinker to speak about potentially the moral aspects of this bill and what this bill would mean for fairness and equity in the state of Rhode Island.
It's not that the clergy is ghettoized or anything, that I got to speak on morality. A lot of times when we talk about this, we talk about our self-interest, though. You know, it's really going to be good for us, and it's true. It's good for all of us to have a decent society. That's absolutely true. There's something else that's going on if we look at the real world right now, I think. And it's almost as if we're in free fall. Those of us that are able to have a house and a relatively kind of quiet, secure place and not on the verge of eviction or foreclosure or something, we can lose track. My privilege has been to work with unhoused people and poor people for most of my ministry, and before that in organizing. And I have to say that I think there's something else that we need to think beyond the immediate self-interest. Yes, we need to reclaim the fact that our Constitution calls for the government to be, the purpose of the government to be to cause the common good to flourish. We need to get to that. But at this state, at this time, I'm sorry, I got to talk on housing relative to taxing the more wealthy people. Because it's what I've seen, we have to speak from our experience. I'd like to read you a little thing. A couple paragraphs. Last year the Matthews Street, not we, I'm not there now, I'm back at the open table, but Matthews Street holds a memorial for folks that have died during the last year unhoused. And last year it was 54 people. I found out recently that's not an actual count at all. That's just people that know somebody. I just want to say that at the outset, that people are freezing on the streets this winter, and we're not even counting them. We don't even have a report on it. Now, when a death certificate's signed, somebody somebody says no known address, right? We don't even have a record of that. It's not important enough for us to have that data. So just mingling with folks and so forth, the following description was written down. I would like to read it and then close with another comment. The freezing happens slowly at first. There are no shelter beds open to you. Your tent and meager belongings were destroyed weeks ago by the authorities in violation of the Rhode Island Homeless Bill of Rights. It's night, and you are cold. You try to just keep moving to stay warm. Then a sharp wind begins. It quickly cuts through anything you have found to wear. It goes right to the bones. The shivering starts, spreads quickly. You can't stop it. Your whole body is shaking now. You've got to get inside, but all the doors are closed to you. There's no rescue. And then the whip of the wind begins its final work, lashing at you. Your feet and hands hurt and then go numb. Your fingers don't work. Then the shivering stops, and you realize your body is freezing. You've already tried everything. You couldn't walk it off. That doorway didn't help stop the wind. The dumpster is locked. You can't break into the back of that truck. The terror and disorientation takes over. The heart rate slows. It seems that the nerves themselves freeze in what almost feels like comfort before the end. We have no idea. They went out a month ago, to try to actually do a hand count of people they could find on the street. Now you can imagine the people that you can find are not nearly all the people, because people are hiding in the woods, they're hiding in this place, that place, the other place. And they counted, I forget the number they counted, but it's just so much more than that. But after the count, they found a guy waiting on the bus asleep, and they went to try to wake him up, but they couldn't wake him up because he was frozen. We don't know whether he was counted in the count or not, or whether they thought he was just sleeping. What kind of a society is this if we continue to accumulate wealth at the top? It has ballooned within my generation. It wasn't like this when I was a child. It wasn't like this when I was the age of many of you. We didn't have people chronically begging at every intersection because they had nothing. What happens if we have a society that has no bottom? Nothing below, nothing there to catch you if what happens to you, or maybe it's already happened to you, you miss one mortgage payment, or you have a sudden illness, or your kid gets sick. You know the stories. I don't have to tell them. Do we feel the stories? So this idea of taxing people with $1 million just a little more, it's just a start of what we have to do. But it's not just about the money, it's about the power. Money concentrated at the top is power, and we begin to lose everything. So now in the wake of what's coming at us, surely as a state, we must begin as a state on our own to correct the page a little bit, to try to step back and to become really deeply human. Here's the moral part. Prophet Micah, trying to speak for God, says in the voice of God, I hate and despise your religious assemblies. Goes on with a couple other hates like that. I hate it when you try to, kiss up to me, God's really saying. God says, all I want you to do is to do justice, love mercy, walk humbly with God. Do justice, love mercy, walk humbly. That's not a bad slogan. God bless you for your work.
Thank you so much, Reverend Klinker. Next, I'd like to invite Amy Mullen, Vice President of the National Education Association of Rhode Island and a teacher, to speak to us about what this bill would mean for teachers and education.
Thank you. My name is Amy Mullen, and I live in Portsmouth. I'm the Vice President of NEA Rhode Island, and I work full-time as a special educator teaching math intervention in Tiverton. This is my 31st year in the field, and like most of my colleagues, I really love my job. Each morning, I enjoy welcoming students into our building as they arrive at school, showing them I'm happy that they're there and glad that they're here at school today. Many of them give me hugs and share stories about their nights. My goal is to help all of my students believe in themselves and understand that they can be successful in math, even when it feels challenging. Most of my students find math difficult, yet many of them name it as their favorite subject. I believe this is because they've experienced the joy of success that comes from hard work, and they've grown to see themselves as capable learners, just like all children can be, regardless of their race, gender, or zip code. There's nothing like seeing a child's face light up when they finally grasp a hard concept. However, it's no secret that our students are facing some tough challenges. In Tiverton, we've had to make the tough decision to close a beloved elementary school, or reduce our social emotional intervention staff. At my school, we've lost a full-time psychologist and a guidance counselor, and more cuts are on the horizon. Our high school and middle schools have lost programs that have effectively supported students with poor attendance and those that have a hard time getting to school. We also struggle to hire paraeducators who can help our students with academic, behavioral, and emotional issues throughout their school day. Since the COVID pandemic, we've seen a significant increase in the emotional and behavioral needs of students. The fentanyl crisis adds another layer of emotional stress as many children witness family members dealing with addiction and overdoses. Additionally, incidents of gun violence and the influence of social media pose serious risks to our students at younger and younger ages. The plain fact is, we need more resources to give our students the education they deserve. But where can we find these resources? Most of our school funding comes from property taxes, which are limited, regressive, and can unfairly burden middle-class homeowners. With the current political climate and Trump and Musk aiming to cut funding for school meals and education overall, it seems unlikely that help will come from the federal government anytime soon. Instead, there's a push for the wealthiest individuals to pay as little as possible in taxes, which takes away vital resources from our children and our classrooms. In Rhode Island, we've made mistakes in the past by providing tax breaks for the richest residents, like when Governor Carcieri cut taxes for the richest people in 2010. Over the past 15 years, our programs have struggled as a result. We can fix that mistake by asking the wealthiest Rhode Islanders, those earning over $625,000 a year, to pay a little bit more. We could provide the necessary funding for our schools. I'll continue to do my best for my students every day, but for them to receive the education they truly deserve and for Rhode Island to nurture the best and the brightest minds, we need more support. We need the General Assembly to pass this bill. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amy. Next, I would like, and I'm honored to invite the House sponsor of Bill H-5473, Representative Karen Alzate. I'd like to also thank and acknowledge all of the legislators here in the room, some of whom have already left, I know, but I appreciate you all being here, and I'm sure that Rep. Alzate will also acknowledge some of her colleagues as well. So please, our sponsor and champion, Rep. Alzate.
Thank you, Nina. I saw a few of my colleagues, some of them sent me quick texts, but there's a lot happening. So I know I saw Representative Tanzi, Rep. Batista, and Rep. Knight were here, but they're coming back in and out. Who else am I missing? I don't see, yeah, I think, yes, for right now, and then my senators as well. So thank you all so much for being here. As many of you know, this is the 6th year introducing this legislation. Last year we took a different approach. However, it was still good enough, right? And so today I stand with all of you at crossroads. A choice between continuing down a path where the wealthiest among us benefit at the expense of working families and finally ensuring that Rhode Island's economy works for everyone, people like myself and so many of you in this room. We have an opportunity to move forward, to build a state that reflects our values of fairness, investment, and a shared prosperity. It's time to ask those making over $625,000 a year to pay their fair share. And I don't know if you've seen, thank you. I'm not sure if you've all seen, but we have an administration that is not working families friendly, it's not poor friendly, it's not Black and brown community friendly, and we have to continue to fight back. We have been told that taxing the wealthiest will drive them away. We all know that this is a myth, a scare tactic designated to stall progress, which we have seen not only in Rhode Island, but many other states. The data simply does not support this claim. A study from the Center of Budget and Policy Priorities found that tax increases on high earners have little to no effect on migration patterns. Wealthy individuals choose where to live based on the quality of life, business opportunities, and access to services. Heard this firsthand when we were talking to Hasbro, the toy company. Not minor differences in tax rates, even though it was mentioned that Massachusetts taxes their wealthiest, and that was not a problem. In fact, states with higher taxes on top earners, like Massachusetts and California, continue to thrive economically and attract new residents. And let's not forget, Rhode Island is an incredible place to live, work, and raise a family. One of the many reasons why my parents migrated to the state. Our state is home to a beautiful coastlines. As many of my colleagues who signed the legislation, this was top priority for them. Our vibrant arts and culture, as you see all around the state. World-class universities. I'm not sure if you guys have heard of Brown University, kind of, big one. And a strong sense of community, like so many of you here. We have a rich history and some of the best restaurants in the country. I agree. People don't leave Rhode Island because of taxes. They stay because of the quality of life and the opportunity to be a part of an engaged community. Raising taxes on the wealthiest Rhode Islander is good public policy that benefits all of us, not just some of us. When the ultra-rich contribute to their fair share, we make critical investments in education, infrastructure, and a bridge. Just wanted to put that out there. We still have to pay for that. And healthcare. Investments that strengthen our economy and improve our lives. And if you're not mad, you're not paying attention, and you have privilege. According to the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy, tax structures create more stable revenue streams, reducing the need for harmful cuts to essential programs, like we just heard from our teacher in Tiverton. This is not just about fairness, it's about building a stronger and more resilient Rhode Island. Let's be clear, our middle class families and small businesses already carry a disproportionate burden. Our lowest income earners pay a higher percentage of their income in state and local taxes than the top 1%. And I know me and many in my community are tired of having to carry the weight of the states. This is not sustainable, nor is it just. The wealthiest among us have benefited from Rhode Island's resources, our workforce, and our infrastructure. Now, we are simply asking them to contribute fairly so that every Rhode Islander has the opportunity to thrive. Colleagues, I hope this is your priority. Looking at my senators over here. We cannot afford the delay. The people of Rhode Island are watching and they are demanding action. They want good schools, reliable public transportation, and affordable health care. Not enough rhetoric that protects the wealthiest at their expense. We have a duty to act. We have the power to shape Rhode Island where prosperity is shared, not hoarded. Let's move forward together for a future that works for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rep. Alzate. Next, I would like to invite our Senate champion and sponsor of this legislation, S329, Senator Melissa Murray.
I forgot to ask for a step stool. So as you know, this bill creates a new 3% surtax for the top 1% of earners on their earned income above the 1% threshold. This legislation will have zero impact on 99% of people, including business owners in Rhode Island, and it will only impact about 5,700 filers. The new revenue generated would be estimated to be $190 million a year. And to be clear, if you make less than $650,000, well over $500,000, you will not be impacted by this legislation. Our current tax code is upside down. The wealthiest Rhode Islanders pay a smaller percent of their overall income in total taxes than we do. The wealthiest have benefited from numerous state and federal tax cuts over the past 20 years and will undoubtedly benefit from even more tax cuts over the next 4 years. But at whose expense? And what could we use this revenue for? We could use it for housing. We could use it to fully fund equitable state funding for all Rhode Island students, something that RIPAC has been pleading for years. We could fund badly needed mental health supports in our schools. We could fund school lunches for all and breakfast. We could help to fund a robust transit system accessible to all. We could help to phase out the tax on Social Security. We could help to restore cuts to pensions. We could help to expand access to childcare so that parents can go back to work. We could help to lift children out of poverty, and so much more. All the things that we know that we need, all these great proposals that we would love to fund, but have to look our constituents in the eye year after year after year and say, I'm so sorry, this is such a great proposal. And we know that you need this so badly, but we just don't have the money. $190 million. It's not going to solve all of these problems, but it would go a very long way to get our state back to fiscal solvency. Not only does this proposal address existing tax inequity and create tax fairness, it also creates a long-term, sustainable, predictable revenue stream for our state. It is the right thing to do, and the time is now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator Murray. I would love to get this revenue to spend on all those things. Next up, we have Liza Birkin, representing the Save RIPTA Coalition.
Thank you, Nina, and all of our friends at EPI. I'm so honored to be here today in support of this bill. My name is Liza Birkin. I'm the board president of the Providence Streets Coalition and organizer of the Save RIPTA campaign. Do y'all have any idea how sick of getting emails from the Massachusetts Department of Transportation announcing another free fare bus? This happens like every week now. It's insane. You know, we hear struggles about the MBTA and the train system, but Massachusetts has 15 RTAs, Regional Transportation Authorities. We have just the one, RIPTA. They've got 15, and almost all of them are fully fare free now, thanks to the Massachusetts Millionaires Tax. The bus. People need the bus. They're not only making it fare free, they're expanding Sunday service so people can get to church, to spend time with their families. They're expanding weekend service. And yes, they're funding much needed safety repairs and expansion of the rail system as well. I'm sick of it. I want that email from RIDOT instead of from MassDOT, okay? In case you haven't heard, yeah, that's cool. In case you haven't heard, RIPTA is in a very dire financial crisis right now. We have a $32.6 million budget gap that, if not filled, will result in the cutting of about a third of the workforce, good union jobs. And we truly don't even know yet how much service reduction we're looking at, but it's a lot. Bus lines represent an access to opportunity. We have the foundation of a wonderful system here. We're so dense, we're the second densest state in the country, and yet many of our bus lines, over 80% of them, just come like once an hour. It's just not an accessible system for most people. It's just not convenient enough to compete with the car. And this contributes to our parking issues, our traffic issues, our climate issues. The bus is an equitable transportation option. How much does a bus pass cost? How much does one ride cost, y'all? $2, okay? Think about how much, that's from Providence to Newport, Providence to Westerly. Think about how much a tank of gas costs. Think about how much an Uber ride costs. This is affordable, equitable, sustainable transportation, and we need to fund it like we mean it. And we're not at all here in this financial situation because RIPTA operates inefficiently or because not enough people are riding. We're here because of decades of chronic underinvestment compared to our neighbors in Connecticut, in Vermont, small states like Delaware. They're spending way more of their state budget on public transit. I've also heard of a lot of my peers and friends, I'm from Massachusetts, are moving here from Boston. And the first thing they do when they get here is join the Streets Coalition because they're like, what the hell? Why is RIPTA so not what we're expecting out of our new home? But, you know, it's not about them. It's about the people who need it to get to medical appointments. And there are 30,000 daily riders who cannot afford for service to be cut. So the wealthiest in our state need to pay their fair share. They need to support public transit. Equity may be a dirty word in Washington, but it's still a core value here in Rhode Island. Thank you. So let's prove that by passing this bill.
Thank you so much, Liza. And now we have our last speaker for today, the president of the Rhode Island AFL-CIO, Patrick Crowley.
Thank you, Nina. Thank you, Rep. Alzate. Thank you, Senator Murray. Thank you for everyone for being here today. You know, they say that we have to have the tax policy we have because it benefits job creators. We say we can't solve tomorrow's problems with yesterday's tax policy. All right? Now, they say we have to be competitive with our neighbors. Who benefits from that? What kind of competition? It doesn't benefit working class people. It doesn't benefit poor people. It doesn't benefit people who rely on public services just to survive. They say it's just economics 101. That this is just how the system works. Well, what we say, we have options. And there's all different kinds of policy. Leona bet me if I was going to do that. But really what it comes down to is we need to think bold. We need to have imagination. We need to think about tomorrow. We, working class Rhode Island, have shouldered the burden enough, and we've got Rhode Island to where it is today. We can't do it on our own. It's time for everyone to take part. It's time for everyone to contribute. That's not what's happening now. Because you know what I imagine? I imagine thousands of co-op housing units over on the 195 land. I imagine public transportation, not just on the main streets of Rhode Island, but in every rural neighborhood across the state. I imagine a public school system that doesn't have to scrape and scramble and save just to have the basics. I imagine a public school system where every single kid in the state has access to every resource that they have possible. That we have a 21st century, that we have a 22nd century type of education system. That is going to take all of us, not just the people in this room, to shoulder the burden. So, as we think about our different options, it really seems the most important one is to build a tax system that is fair and just, and this legislation gets us here. And I hope that Rep. Alzate, Senator Murray, and all of your colleagues do everything you can, because we will be there 100% behind you 100% of the time. Thank you very much. Let's get this done.
Thank you so much, Pat, and thank you everyone for being here. Please take these messages back to your respective communities and amplify them and spread them and uplift them. And right now, we'd like to take a picture of the coalition and the reps and senators here. Thank you again, Senator Lawson, Senator Coleman. Thank you so much for being here. And after this, those of you who are advocates, we're asking people to go to the Senate and House floor and lobby your representatives and ask them to pass this bill and tell them why it's important to you. Thank you so much. Up front for a picture, please.